Yes, hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while you connect with the love of your angels. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes and circles. And you can learn more about my offerings tomorrow when you wake up at illuminatingsouls.com. It truly would be a blessing to connect with you when you're awake. If you're new to the podcast and the concept of a sleep podcast, I'll share with you a little bit about what drew me to create this for you. For several years now, I have been listening to sleep podcasts as a part of my own well-being. The first sleep podcast I ever discovered was Sleep With Me by Andrew Ackerman, and it became part of my nighttime ritual. And over the past few years, I've added other sleep podcasts to my rotation, including Get Sleepy, and Sleepy, and others. And I love my life. I have a big, beautiful, full life. And I love bedtime too. I love that feeling when my day is done and my body starts feeling the call to sleep. And I crawl into bed and I fluff up my pillows. I pull the blankets over my head because that's how I sleep. And I put in my earbuds and I pick an episode to listen to. And there is something so delicious about hearing a familiar, loving voice lulling me to sleep. It harkens back to bedtime stories as a kid, or the memory I have of childhood when I would hear my parents talking downstairs because my sister and I had a bedroom on the second floor. And while we were drifting off to sleep, we could hear the murmurs of our parents in the living room, or the TV was playing, and to me it symbolized that I was safe and people who loved me were around me. So I have a wonderful relationship with sleep podcasts, and as a result, I was guided to create one for you to add to the inventory, if you will, of episodes that are out there. So, if this is your first time with the sleep podcast, here's my invitation to you. Turn the volume down. This isn't the kind of broadcast that you have to play loudly so you can hear every word. It may sound silly, but I am creating this in hopes you'll be asleep before we get to the end. And it may take a few times for your body and your consciousness to be able to receive the stream of love and energy I'm bringing to you. The episode will be about an hour long, so you'll have plenty of time to drift off. And if for some reason you're still awake at the end of the episode, there are, at this moment, at least 38 episodes in my back catalog that you can queue up. And the angels and I will keep you company. You can also use this podcast in the daytime if you're trying to rest or maybe transition consciousness, maybe from your business life into your personal time. Each episode typically begins with about 15 or 20 minutes of conversation, and I bring in the angels. The angels are divine celestial beings filled with love for you, and they are infusing this broadcast with divine love for you. So it's not just my voice. There's angelic divine energy here for you too. And it's been my experience that this angelic love is very compatible with sleep. So I invite you to take some nice deep breaths in and out. And cozy on up and snuggle on in and get comfortable. Just allowing a wave of relaxation to move through your body. And while you relax, I'm going to call in the angels who are already here. Beautiful angels on high, I invite you to join us here. I ask that you bring forth divine love, calibrated in a way that each of the beloveds hearing this message can receive this love through grace. Angels, I ask that you help to clear any imbalance, any difficulty, anything that is not ours, that this be cleared away through the violet flame of light, and that peace and love is imbued instead. Angels, I ask that you bring blessings of light, of miracles and goodness, of healing and of well-being of mind and body and consciousness to each one who is listening now. So, dear ones, just take some nice deep breaths in and out, and feel or imagine a beautiful wave of light and of love flowing to you now. This wave of love is helping your body to let go and relax as it says yes to this invitation to rest deeply in a way that will soothe and nourish you. Allowing your consciousness to drift off into that mystery of sleep, making friends with sleep, acknowledging that it is but a breath away, and that in this moment you don't have to do any of the heavy lifting. The angels are here. They know everything that is happening right now in your life and in the world, and they are here to help you navigate all that is. Your angels have loved you since before you were born. They know what is in your heart, They hear your prayers. They know your deepest desires. And they're here to support you. There is nothing you need do other than to receive their love right now. Just visualize or imagine allowing it to be so as you breathe and receive their love into your heart. Allowing these waves of light to pour through you. As the angels bring you attunements to make it more graceful for you to receive and be aware of divine love that is here for you now and forever. You are doing so much better than you know. And if you are willing, the angels, while you sleep, will help to clear away some of the stickier patterns of consciousness that are challenging for you. And by that, we mean the self-judgments. We are often our harshest critic. And so the angels, with your invitation, would like to bring you healing, cleansing energies so that it becomes easier for you to connect with the brightness and the beauty of your true spirit. You, beloved, are precious in this world. You are a divine being having a human experience. And sometimes we over-identify with our humanness and forget about our innate wholeness and beauty. So if you're good with it as you sleep, the angels will help you connect with the bright, beautiful truth of who you are. So take a breath in and receive. There is such profound beauty in you. You are a gift from on high, and this world is better because you are here. The angels also bring healing light to your beautiful body to help bring love to your body temple so that every cell of your body receives love and healing and light, and give yourself permission to drift off, knowing that the angels are watching over you. They are taking good care of you. And while you drift off and while you rest, I'm going to read to you. And I hope it's okay with you, but we are going to return to A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I keep telling you we're getting to the good part. And we are. And the coming chapters reveal the magic that always enchanted me as a child. I'm not going to give you an overall synopsis at this point because if you go back to the last episode, I give you a pretty good summary. So what I will say is Ram Dass and the gentleman next door are preparing a surprise for Sarah. And Sarah has had a perfectly awful day. She is exhausted, and she has not had enough to eat. and it is so difficult for her to climb the 3 flights of stairs into her attic room. But as she reaches the attic, she sees a light under the door, which hopefully means that her friend Ermengarde has snuck up to see her, and indeed it is so. She finds Ermengarde sitting on her bed, and Ermengarde reports that Sarah's pet rat, or her rat friend Melchizedek, has paid her a visit, which makes Ermengarde very uncomfortable. And this is where we resume our story. Melchizedek had come out of his hole as if he had been listening for her footstep. Sarah was quite sure he knew it. He came forward with an affectionate, expectant expression as Sarah put her hand in her pocket and turned it inside out, shaking her head. "I am very sorry," she said. "I haven't one crumb left. Go home, Melchizedek, and tell your wife there was nothing in my pocket. I'm afraid I forgot because the cook and Miss Minchin were so cross." Melchizedek seemed to understand. He shuffled resignedly, if not contentedly, back to his home. "I did not expect to see you tonight, Ermi," Sarah said. Ermengarde hugged herself in her red shawl. "Miss Amelia has gone out to spend the night with her old aunt," she explained. "No one else ever comes and looks into the bedrooms after we are in bed. I could stay here until morning if I wanted to." She pointed toward the table under the skylight. Sarah had not looked toward it as she came in. A number of books were piled upon it. Ermengarde's gesture was a dejected one. "Papa has sent me some more books, Sarah," she said. "There they are." Sarah looked round and got up at once. She ran to the table and, picking up the top volume, turned over its leaves quickly. For the moment she forgot her discomforts. "Ah," she cried out, "how beautiful! Carlyle's French Revolution. I have so wanted to read that." "I haven't," said Ermengarde, "and Papa will be so cross if I don't. He'll expect me to know all about it when I go home for the holidays. What shall I do?" Sarah stopped turning over the leaves and looked at her with an excited flush on her cheeks. "Look here," she cried. "If you lend me these books, I'll read them, and I'll tell you everything that's in them afterward. And I'll tell it so that you will remember it too." "Oh, goodness," exclaimed Ermengarde. "Do you think you can?" "I know I can," Sarah answered. "The little ones always remember what I tell them." "Sarah," said Ermengarde, hope gleaming in her round face, "if you'll do that and make me remember, I'll give you anything." "I don't want you to give me anything," said Sarah. "I want your books. I want them." And her eyes grew big and her chest heaved. "Take them then," said Ermengarde. "I wish I wanted them, but I don't. I'm not clever, and my father is, and he thinks I ought to be." Sarah was opening one book after the other. "What are you going to tell your father?" she asked, a slight doubt dawning in her mind. "Oh, he needn't know," answered Ermengarde. "He'll think I've read them." Sarah put down her book and shook her head slowly. "That's almost like telling lies. And lies, well, you see, they are not only wicked, they're vulgar, sometimes," reflectively. "I've thought perhaps I might do something wicked. I might suddenly fly into a rage and kill Miss Minchin, when she was ill-treating me. But I couldn't be vulgar. Why can't you tell your father I read them?" "Well, he wants me to read them," said Ermengarde, a little discouraged by this unexpected turn of affairs. "He wants you to know what's in them," said Sarah. "And I can tell it to you in an easy way and make you remember it. I should think he would like that." "Oh, he'll like it if I learn anything in any way," said rueful Ermengarde. You would if you were my father. It's not your fault that, began Sarah. She pulled herself up and stopped rather suddenly. She had been going to say, it's not your fault that you're stupid. That what? Asked Ermengarde. That you can't learn things quickly, amended Sarah. If you can't, you can't. If you can, why, I can, that's all. She always felt very tender of Ermengarde, and tried not to let her feel too strongly the difference between being able to learn anything at once and not being able to learn anything at all. And she looked at her plump face. One of her wise, old-fashioned thoughts came to her. Perhaps, she said, to be able to learn things quickly isn't everything. To be kind is worth a great deal to other people. If Miss Minchin knew everything on earth and was like what she is now, she'd still be a detestable thing, and everybody would hate her. Lots of clever people have done harm and have been wicked. Look at Robespierre. She stopped and examined Ermengarde's countenance, which was beginning to look bewildered. Don't you remember? She demanded. I told you about him not long ago. I believe you have forgotten. Well, I don't remember all of it, admitted Ermengarde. Well, you wait a minute, said Sarah, and I'll take off my wet things and wrap myself in the coverlet and tell you all over again. She took off her hat and coat and hung them on a nail against the wall, and she changed her wet shoes for an old pair of slippers. Then she jumped on the bed, and drawing the coverlet around her shoulders, sat with her arms around her knees. Now listen, she said. She plunged into the gory records of the French Revolution and told such stories of it that Ermengarde's eyes grew round with alarm and she held her breath. But though she was rather terrified, there was a delightful thrill in listening, and she was not likely to forget Robespierre again or have any doubts about the Princess de la Mole. Okay, I'm going to skip this part because it gets a little gory, so hold on. Just wait. It was agreed that Mr. St. John was to be told the plan they had made, and for the present the books were to be left in the attic. Now, let's tell each other things, said Sarah. How are you getting on with your French lessons? Ever so much better since the last time I came up here and you explained the conjugations. Miss Minchin could not understand why I did my exercises so well that first morning. Sarah laughed a little and hugged her knees. She doesn't understand why Lottie is doing her sums so well, she said, but it is because she creeps up here too and I help her. She glanced round the room. The attic would be rather nice if it wasn't so dreadful, she said, laughing again. It's a good place to pretend in. The truth was that Ermengarde did not know anything of the sometimes almost unbearable side of life in the attic, and she had not a sufficiently vivid imagination to depict it for herself. On the rare occasions that she could reach Sarah's room, she only saw the side of it which was made exciting by the things which were pretended and the stories which were told. Her visits partook of the character of adventures, and though sometimes Sarah looked rather pale, and it was not to be denied that she had grown very thin, her proud little spirit would not admit of complaints. She had never confessed at times she was almost ravenous with hunger, as she was tonight. She was growing rapidly, and her constant walking and running about would have given her a keen appetite, even if she had had abundant and regular meals of a much more nurturing nature than the unappetizing inferior food snatched at such odd times as suited the kitchen convenience. She was growing used to a certain gnawing feeling in her young stomach. If I lived in a castle, she argued, and Ermengarde was the lady of another castle and came to see me with knights and squires and vassals riding with her. When I heard the clarion sounding outside the drawbridge, I should go down to receive her, and I should spread feasts in the banquet hall and call in minstrels to sing and play and relate romances. When she comes to the attic, I can't spread feasts, but I can tell stories and not let her know disagreeable things. She was a proud and brave little girl, and dispensed generously the one hospitality she could offer, the dreams she dreamed, the visions she saw, and the imaginings which were her joy and comfort. So as they sat together, Ermengarde did not know that she was faint as well as ravenous, and that while she talked, she now and then wondered if her hunger would let her sleep when she was left alone. It was just at this minute that something happened at the skylight which neither of them saw. If either of them had chanced to look and turn, she would have been startled by the sight of a dark face which peered cautiously into the room and disappeared as quickly and almost as silently as it had appeared. Not quite as silently, however, Sarah, who had keen ears, suddenly turned a little and looked up at the roof. And just if you haven't heard the other parts of the story, that was Ram Dass peeking in because he is preparing to bring comforts to Sarah. He's going to be outfitting her room in a beautiful way as a surprise for her. That didn't sound like Melchizedek, she said. It wasn't scratchy enough. What? Said Ermengarde, a little startled. Didn't you think you heard something? Asked Sarah. No, Ermengarde faltered. Did you? Perhaps I didn't, said Sarah, but I thought I did. It sounded as if something was on the slates, something that dragged softly. What could it be? Said Ermengarde. Could it be robbers? No, Sarah began cheerfully. There is nothing to steal. She broke off in the middle of her words. They both heard the sounds that checked her. It was not on the slates, but on the stairs below. And it was Miss Minchin's angry voice. Sarah sprang off the bed and put out the candle. She is scolding Becky, she whispered as she stood in the darkness. She is making her cry. Will she come in here? Ermengarde whispered back, panic-stricken. No, she will think I am in bed. Don't stir. It was very seldom that Miss Minchin mounted the last flight of stairs. Sarah could only remember that she had done it once before, but now she was angry enough to be coming at least part of the way up, and it sounded as if she were driving Becky before her. You impudent, dishonest child, they heard her say. Cook tells me she has missed things repeatedly. 'Twasn't me, Mum, said Becky, sobbing. I was hungry enough, but it wasn't me. Never. You deserve to be sent to prison, said Miss Minchin's voice. Picking and stealing, half a meat pie indeed. It wasn't me, wept Becky. I could have eaten a whole one, but I never laid a finger on it. Miss Minchin was out of breath between her temper and mounting the stairs. The meat pie had been intended for her special late supper. Don't tell falsehoods, she said. Go to your room this instant. Both Sarah and Ermengarde heard Becky run into her room and shut the door, and they knew she threw herself upon the bed. I could have eaten 2 of them, they heard her cry into her pillow, and I never took a bite. It was the cook who gave it to her policeman. Sarah stood in the middle of her room in the darkness. She was clenching her teeth and opening and shutting fiercely her outstretched hands. She could scarcely stand still, but she dared not move until Miss Minchin had gone down the stairs and all was still. The wicked, cruel thing, she burst forth. The cook takes things herself and then says Becky steals them. She doesn't. She doesn't. She is so hungry sometimes that she eats crusts out of the ash barrel. She pressed her hands hard against her face and burst into passionate little sobs. And Ermengarde, hearing this unusual thing, was overawed by it. Sarah was crying, the unconquerable Sarah. It seemed to denote something new, some mood she had never known. Suppose a new dread possibility presented itself to her slow little mind all at once. She crept off of the bed in the dark and found her way to the table where the candle stood. She struck a match and lit the candle. When she had lit it, she bent forward and looked at Sarah, with her new thought growing to definite fear in her eyes. "Sarah," she said in a timid, almost awe-stricken voice, Are you never told me. I don't want to be rude, but are you ever hungry?" It was too much. Just at that moment, the barrier broke down. Sarah lifted her face from her hands. "Yes," she said in a new passionate way. "Yes, I am. I am so hungry now. And it makes it worse to hear poor Becky. She's hungrier than I am." Ermengarde gasped. "Oh," she cried woefully, "and I never knew." "I didn't want you to know," Sarah said. "It would have made me feel like a street beggar. And I know I look like a street beggar." No, you don't," Ermengarde broke in. "Your clothes are a little queer, but you couldn't look like a street beggar." "A little boy once gave me a 6 pence for charity," said Sarah, with a short laugh in spite of herself. "Here it is." And she pulled out the thin ribbon from her neck. "He wouldn't have given me his Christmas 6 pence if I hadn't looked as if I needed it." Somehow the sight of the dear little 6 pence was good for both of them. It made them laugh a little, though they both had tears in their eyes. "Who was he?" asked Ermengarde, looking at it quite as if it had not been a mere ordinary silver 6 pence. "He was a darling little thing going to a party," said Sarah. "He was one of the large family, the little one with round legs, the one that I call Guy Clarence. I suppose his nursery was crammed with Christmas presents and hampers full of cakes and things, and he could see that I had nothing." Ermengarde gave a little jump backward. The last sentences had recalled something to her troubled mind and given her a sudden inspiration. "Oh, Sarah," she cried, "what a silly thing I am not to have thought of it." "Of what?" "Something splendid," said Ermengarde in an excited hurry. "This very afternoon my nicest aunt sent me a box. It is full of good things. I never touched it. I had so much pudding at dinner, and I was so bothered about Papa's books." Her words began to tumble over each other. "It's got cake in it, and little meat pies, and jam tarts, and buns, and oranges, and red currant wine, and figs, and chocolate. I'll creep back to my room and get it this minute, and we'll eat it now." Sarah almost reeled. When one is faint with hunger, the mention of food has sometimes a curious effect. She clutched Ermengarde's arm. "Do you think you could?" she said. "I know I could," answered Ermengarde. And she ran to the door, opened it softly, put her head out into the darkness and listened. Then she went back to Sarah. "The lights are out. Everybody's in bed. I can creep and no one will hear." It was so delightful that they caught each other's hands and a sudden light sprang into Sarah's eyes. "Ermy," she said, let us pretend it's a party. And oh, won't you invite the prisoner in the next cell? Yes, let's knock on the wall now. The jailer won't hear." Sarah went to the wall. Through it she could hear poor Becky crying more softly. She knocked 4 times. "That means, 'Come to me through the secret passage under the wall,'" she explained. "I have something to communicate." 5 quick knocks answered her. "She's coming," she said. Almost immediately the door of the attic opened and Becky appeared. Her eyes were red and her cap was sliding off. And when she caught sight of Ermengarde, she began to rub her face nervously with her apron. "Don't mind me a bit, Becky," cried Ermengarde. "Miss Ermengarde has asked you to come in," said Sarah, "because she is going to bring up a box of good things for us." Becky's cap almost fell off entirely. She broke in with such excitement. "To eat, miss?" she said. Things that are good to eat? Yes, answered Sarah, and we're going to pretend it's a party. And you shall have as much as you want to eat, put in Ermengarde. I'll go this minute. She was in such a haste that she tiptoed out of the attic. She dropped her red shawl and did not know it had fallen. No one saw it for a minute or so. Becky was too much overpowered by the good luck which had befallen her. Oh, miss, she gasped. I know it was you that asked her to let me come. It makes me cry just to think of it. And she went to Sarah's side and stood and looked at her worshipingly. But in Sarah's hungry eyes, the old light had begun to glow and transform her world for her. Here in the attic, with a cold night outside, with the afternoon in the sloppy streets barely past, with the memory of the awful unfed look in the beggar child's eyes not yet faded, this simple, cheerful thing had happened like a thing of magic. She caught her breath. Somehow, something always happens, she cried, just before things get to the very worst. It is as if the magic did it. If I could only remember that always the worst thing never quite comes. She gave Becky a little cheerful shake. No, you mustn't cry, she said. We must make haste and set the table. Set the table, miss, said Becky, gazing around the room. What will we set it with? Sarah looked around the attic, too. There doesn't seem to be much, she answered, half laughing. The moment she saw something and pounced upon it, it was Ermengarde's red shawl which lay upon the floor. Here's the shawl, she cried. I know she won't mind it. It will make such a nice red tablecloth. They pulled the old table forward and threw the shawl over it. Red is a wonderfully kind and comfortable color. It began to make the room look furnished directly. How nice a red rug would look on the floor, exclaimed Sarah. We must pretend there is one. Her eyes swept the bare boards with a swift glance of admiration. The rug was laid down already. How soft and thick it is, she said, with a little laugh which Becky knew the meaning of, and she raised and set her foot down delicately as if she felt something under it. Yes, miss, answered Becky, watching her with serious rapture. She was always quite serious. What next now, said Sarah, and she stood still and put her hands over her eyes. Something will come if I wait a little while, with a soft, expectant voice. The magic will tell me. One of her favorite fancies was that on the outside, as she called it, thoughts were waiting for people to call them. Becky had seen her stand and wait many a time before, and knew that in a few seconds she would uncover an enlightened, laughing face. In a moment she did. There, she cried, it has come. I know now. I must look among the things in the old trunk I had when I was a princess. She flew to its corner and kneeled down. It had not been put in the attic for her benefit, but because there was no room for it elsewhere. Nothing had been left in it but rubbish, but she knew she should find something. The magic always arranged that kind of thing in one way or another. In a corner lay a package so insignificant looking that it had been overlooked, and when she herself had found it, she had kept it as a relic. It contained a dozen small white handkerchiefs. She seized them joyfully and ran to the table. She began to arrange them upon the red table cover, patting and coaxing them into shapes, with the narrow lace edge curling outward to her, magic working its spell for her as she did it. These are the plates, she said. They are golden plates. They are richly embroidered napkins. Nuns worked on them in convents in Spain. Did they, miss? Breathed Becky, her very soul uplifted by the information. You must pretend it, said Sarah. If you pretend it enough, you will see them. Yes, miss, said Becky. And as Sarah returned to the trunk, She devoted herself to the effort of accomplishing an end so much to be desired. Sarah turned suddenly, standing by the table, looking very queer indeed. She had shut her eyes and was twisting her face in a strange contortion, her eyes hanging stiffly clenched at her sides. She looked as if she were trying to lift some enormous weight. "What's the matter, Becky?" Sarah cried. "What are you doing?" Becky opened her eyes with a start. "I was pretending, miss," she answered a little sheepishly. "I was trying to see it like you do." "I almost did," she said with a hopeful grin, "but it's taking a lot of strength." "Perhaps it does if you're not used to it," Sarah said with friendly sympathy. "But you don't know how easy it is when you've done it often. I wouldn't try so hard at first. It will just come to you after a while. I'll tell you what things are. Look at these." She held an old summer hat in her hand, which she had fished out of the bottom of the trunk. There was a wreath of flowers on it. She pulled the wreath off. "These are garlands for the feast," she said grandly. "They fill all the air with perfume. There's a mug on the washstand, Becky. Oh, and bring the soap dish for a centerpiece." Becky handed them to her reverently. "What are they now, miss?" she inquired. "You'd think they are made of crockery, but I know they're not." "This is a carven flagon," said Sarah, arranging tendrils of the wreath about the mug. "And this," bending tenderly over the soap dish and heaping it with roses, "is the purest alabaster encrusted with gems." She touched the things gently, a happy smile hovering about her lips, which made her look as if she were a creature in a dream. "It's lovely," whispered Becky. "If we just had something for bonbon dishes," Sarah murmured. "There," darting to the trunk again. "I remember I saw something this minute." It was only a bundle of wool wrapped in red and white tissue paper, but the tissue paper was soon twisted into the form of little dishes and was combined with the remaining flowers to ornaments the candlestick which was to light the feast. Only the magic could have made it more than an old table covered with a red shawl and set with rubbish from a long unopened trunk. But Sarah drew back and gazed at it, seeing wonders, and Becky, after staring in delight, spoke with bated breath. "This here," she suggested with a glance around the attic. "Is it the Bastille now, or has it turned into something different?" "Oh, yes," said Sarah, "quite different. It's a banquet hall." "My eye, miss," said Becky, as she turned to view the splendors about her with awed bewilderment. "A banquet hall," said Sarah. "A vast chamber where feasts are given. It has a vaulted roof and a minstrel's galley and a huge chimney filled with blazing oaken logs, and it is brilliant with waxen tapers twinkling on every side." "My eye, Miss Sarah," gasped Becky again. Then the door opened. An Ermengarde came in, rather staggering under the weight of her hamper. She started back with an exclamation of joy. To enter from the chill darkness outside and find oneself confronted by a totally unanticipated festal board draped with red, adorned with white napery, and wreathed with flowers, was to feel that the preparations were brilliant indeed. "Oh, Sarah," she cried out, "you are the cleverest girl I ever saw." "Isn't it nice?" said Sarah. "They are things out of my old trunk. I asked my magic, and it told me to go and look." "But oh, miss," cried Becky, "wait till she's told you what they are. They aren't just, oh, miss, please tell her," appealing to Sarah. So Sarah told her, and because her magic helped her, she made her almost see it all. The golden platters, the vaulted spaces, the blazing logs, the twinkling tapers. As the things were taken out of the hamper, the frosted cakes, the fruits, the bonbons, and the wine, The feast became a splendid thing. "It's like a real party," cried Ermengarde. "It's like a queen's table," sighed Becky. Then Ermengarde had a sudden brilliant thought. "I'll tell you what, Sarah," she said. "Pretend you are a princess now and this is a royal feast." "But it's your feast," said Sarah. "You must be the princess and we will be your maids of honor." "Oh, I can't," said Ermengarde. "I don't know how to. You be her." "Well, if you want me to be," said Sarah. But suddenly she thought of something else and ran to the rusty grate. "There's a lot of paper and rubbish stuffed in here. If we light it, there will be a bright blaze for a few minutes and we shall feel as if it were a real fire." She struck a match and lighted it up with a great specious glow which illuminated the room. "By the time it stops blazing," Sarah said, "we shall forget about it not being real." She stood in the dancing glow and smiled. "Doesn't it look real?" she said. "Now we will begin the party." She led the way to the table. She waved her hand graciously to Ermengarde and Becky. She was in the midst of her dream. "Advance, fair damsels," she said in her happy dream voice, "and be seated at the banquet table. My noble father, the king, who is absent on a long journey, has commanded me to feast you." She turned her head slightly toward the corner of the room. "What, ho, there, minstrels, strike up with your viols and bassoons. Princesses," she explained rapidly to Ermengarde and Becky, "always had minstrels to play at their feasts. Pretend there is a minstrel galley up there in the corner. Now we will begin." They had barely had time to take their pieces of cake into their hands. Not one of them had time to do more, when they all three sprang to their feet and turned pale faces toward the door, listening. Someone was coming up the stairs. There was no mistake about it. Each of them recognized the angry mounting tread and knew the end of all things had come. "It's the missus," choked Becky, and dropped her piece of cake upon the floor. "Yes," said Sarah, her eyes growing shocked and large in her small white face. "Miss Minchin had found us out." Miss Minchin struck the door open with a blow of her hand. She was pale herself, but it was with rage. She looked from the frightened faces to the banquet table, and from the banquet table to the last flicker of the burnt paper in the grate. "I have been suspecting something of this sort," she exclaimed, "but I did not dream of such audacity. Lavinia was telling the truth." So they knew that it was Lavinia who had somehow guessed their secret and had betrayed them. Miss Minchin strode over to Becky. "You impudent little creature," she said. "You leave the house in the morning." Sarah stood quite still, her eyes growing large, her face paler. Ermengarde burst into tears. "Oh, don't send her away," she sobbed. "My aunt sent me the hamper. We're only having a party." "So I see," said Miss Minchin witheringly. With the Princess Sarah at the head of the table, she turned fiercely on Sarah. "It's your doing, I know," she cried. "Ermengarde would have never thought of such a thing. You decorated the table, I suppose, with this rubbish." She stamped her foot at Becky. "Go to your attic," she commanded. And Becky stole away, her face hidden in her apron, her shoulders shaking. Then it was Sarah's turn. "I will attend to you tomorrow. You shall have neither breakfast, dinner, nor supper." "I have not had neither dinner nor supper today, Miss Minchin," said Sarah rather faintly. "Then all the better. You will have something to remember. Don't stand there. Put those things into the hamper again." She began to sweep them all off the table into the hamper herself and caught sight of Ermengarde's new books. "And you," to Ermengarde, "have brought your beautiful new books into this dirty attic. Take them up and go back to bed. You will stay there all day tomorrow, and I shall write to your papa. What would he say if he knew where you are tonight?" Something she saw in Sarah's grave, fixed gaze at this moment made her turn on her fiercely. "What are you thinking of?" she demanded. "Why do you look at me like that?" "I was wondering," answered Sarah, as she had answered that notable day in the schoolroom. "What were you wondering?" It was very like the scene in the schoolroom. There was no pertness in Sarah's manners. It was only sad and quiet. "I was wondering," she said in a low voice, "what my papa would say if he knew where I am tonight." Miss Minchin was infuriated just as she had been before, and her anger expressed itself as before, in an intemperate fashion. She flew at her and shook her. "You insolent, unmanageable child," she cried. "How dare you? How dare you?" She picked up the books, swept the rest of the feast back into the hamper in a jumbled heap, thrust it into Ermengarde's arms, and pushed her before her toward the door. "I will leave you to wonder," she said. "Go to bed this instant." And she shut the door behind herself and poor stumbling Ermengarde, and left Sarah standing quite alone. The dream was quite at an end. The last spark had died out of the paper in the grate and left only black tinder. The table was left bare. The golden plates and richly embroidered napkins and the garlands were transformed again into old handkerchiefs, scraps of red and white paper, and discarded artificially flowers all scattered on the floor. The minstrels in the minstrel gallery had stolen away. Emily was sitting with her back against the wall, staring very hard. Sarah saw her and went and picked her up with trembling hands. "There isn't any banquet left, Emily," she said, "and there isn't any princess. There is nothing left but the prisoners in the Bastille." And she sat down and hid her face. What would have happened if she had not hidden it just then, and if she had a chance to look up at the skylight at the wrong moment, I do not know. Perhaps the end of this chapter might have been quite different, because if she had glanced at the skylight, she would certainly have been startled by what she would have seen. She would have seen exactly the same face pressed against the glass and peering in at her as it had peered in earlier in the evening when she had been talking to Ermengarde. But she did not look up. She sat with her little black head in her arms for some time. She always sat like that when she was trying to bear something in silence. Then she got up and went slowly to bed. "I can't pretend anything else while I'm awake," she said. "There wouldn't be any use in trying. If I go to sleep, perhaps a dream will come and pretend for me." She suddenly felt so tired, perhaps through want of food, that she sat down on the edge of the bed quite weakly. "Suppose there was a bright fire in the grate with lots of little dancing flames," she murmured. "Suppose there was a comfortable chair before it. And suppose there was a small table near with a little hot supper on it. And suppose, as she drew the thin coverings over her, suppose this was a beautiful soft bed with fleecy blankets and large downy pillows. Suppose, and her very weariness was good to her, for her eyes closed and she fell fast asleep. She did not know how long she slept, but she had been tired enough to sleep deeply and profoundly, too deeply and profoundly to be disturbed by anything, even by the squeaks and scamperings of Melchizedek's entire family, if all his sons and daughters had chosen to come out of their hole to fight and tumble and play. When she awakened, it was rather suddenly, and she did not know that any particular thing had called her out of her sleep. The truth was, however, it was a sound which had called her back, a real sound, the click of a skylight, as it fell in closing, after a graceful white figure which slipped through it and crouched down close upon the slates of the roof, just near enough to see what happened in the attic, but not near enough to be seen. At first she did not open her eyes. She felt too sleepy and, curiously enough, too warm and comfortable. She was so warm and comfortable indeed that she did not believe she was really awake. She never was as warm and cozy as this except in some lovely vision. "What a nice dream," she murmured. "I feel quite warm and I don't want to wake up." Of course it was a dream. She felt as if warm, delightful bedclothes were heaped upon her. She could actually feel blankets, and when she put out her hand, it touched something exactly like a satin-covered down quilt. She must not awaken from this delight. She must be quite still and make it last. But she could not. Even though she kept her eyes closed tightly, she could not. Something was forcing her to awaken. Something in the room. It was a sense of light and a sound. The sound of a crackling, roaring little fire. "Oh, I am awakening," she said mournfully. "I can't help it, I can't." Her eyes opened in spite of herself, and then she actually smiled, for what she saw she had never seen in the attic before, and knew she never should see. "Oh, I haven't awakened," she whispered, daring to rise on her elbow and look all about her. "I'm dreaming yet." She knew it must be a dream, for if she were awake, such things could not be. Do you wonder that she felt sure she had not come back to earth? This is what she saw. In the grate, there was a glowing, blazing fire. On the hob was a little brass kettle hissing and boiling. Spread upon the floor was a thick, warm crimson rug. Before the fire, a folding chair unfolded and with cushions on it. By the chair, a small folding table unfolded, covered with a white cloth, and upon it spread small covered dishes, a cup, a saucer, a teapot. On the bed were new warm coverings and a satin-covered down quilt. At the foot, a curious wadded silk robe, a pair of quilted slippers, and some books. The room of her dreams seemed changed into fairyland, and it was flooded with warm light, for a bright lamp stood on the table covered with a rosy shade. She sat up, resting on her elbow, and her breathing came short and fast. "It does not melt away," she panted. "Oh, I never had such a dream before." She scarcely dared to stir, but at last she pushed the bedclothes aside and put her feet on the floor with a rapturous smile. "I am dreaming. I am getting out of bed," she heard her own voice say, and then, as she stood up in the midst of it all, turning slowly from side to side, "I am dreaming. It stays real. I am dreaming. It feels real. It's bewitched, or I'm bewitched. I only think I see it all." Her words began to hurry themselves. "If I can only keep on thinking it," she cried. "I don't care, I don't care." And she stood panting a moment longer, and then she cried out. "Oh, it isn't true," she said. "It can't be true. But oh, how true it seems." The blazing fire drew her to it, and she knelt down and held out her hands close to it, so close that the heat made her start back. "A fire I only dreamed wouldn't be hot," she cried. She sprang up and touched the table, the dishes, the rugs. She went to the bed and touched the blankets. She took up the soft, wadded dressing gown and suddenly clutched it to her breast and held it to her cheek. "It's warm and it's soft," she almost sobbed. "It's real. It must be. She threw it over her shoulders and put her feet into the slippers. They are real too. It's all real, she cried. I am not dreaming. She almost staggered to the books and opened the one which lay upon the top. Something was written on the flyleaf, just a few words, and they were these: To the little girl in the attic, from a friend. When she saw that, wasn't it a strange thing for her to do? She put her face down on the page and burst into tears. I don't know who it is, she said, but somebody cares for me a little. I have a friend. And she took her candle and stole out of her own room and into Becky's, and she stood by her bedside. Becky, Becky, she whispered as loudly as she dared. Wake up. When Becky wakened and she sat upright, staring aghast, her face still smudged with traces of tears, beside her stood a little figure in a luxurious robe of crimson silk. The face she saw was a shining, wonderful thing. The Princess Sarah, she remembered her, stood at her very bedside holding a candle in her hand. Come, she said. Oh, Becky, come. Becky was too frightened to speak. She simply got up and followed her with her mouth and eyes open and without a word. And when they crossed the threshold, Sarah shut the door gently and drew her into the warm, glowing midst of things, which made her brain reel and her hungry senses faint. It's true, she cried. I've touched them all. They are as real as we are. The magic has come and done it, Becky. While we were asleep, the magic that won't let those worst things ever quite happen. And so, my beautiful friends, we have reached, finally, we have reached the magical part of the book. And it was this enchantment, this magic, that really drew me in as a child. Because I was a child with a bright imagination. And I believed in magic. And this wasn't magic. This was kindness. This was born of compassion. This is magic born of generosity and love. That's the best kind of magic. So, we got there. We crossed the threshold into the magic born of generosity, compassion, and love. And this is the kind of magic we all believe in, right? So, with that, I bid you sweet dreams. I wish you a good rest. And we'll talk soon and we'll return back to the magic, I promise. Thank you.